poor widow and her 7 children saved a starving rich judge, not knowing he would marry her, and the whispers began, slithering through the cobblestone streets like venomous serpents. A tale, etched in the raw desperation of forgotten lives and the unexpected grace of a single fateful encounter, lay poised to unravel. It was a story of shadows and light, of inherent goodness battling an unkind world, and of a bond forged in the crucible of despair. Before we delve into this poignant journey, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The wind was a cruel mistress in the hollows of Ilara's home, biting through the threadbare walls, stealing the last vestiges of warmth from the tiny, trembling bodies huddled beneath worn blankets. 7 children, a constellation of small, hopeful faces, looked to her, their hunger a silent, aching symphony in the stillness of the dawn. Ilara, a widow for 3 winters now, felt the weight of each dawn upon her shoulders, a crushing burden of responsibility that threatened to buckle her spirit. Her hands, calloused and chapped, were the instruments of their survival, picking through refuse, mending the tattered remnants of their lives, always searching for a glimmer of sustenance. The world outside their dilapidated cottage was a tapestry of stark contrasts. Opulent carriages rumbling past, their occupants shielded from the biting cold, while Ilara's brood shivered, their bellies aching with the emptiness that had become their constant companion. There was a raw, primal beauty in her resilience, a fierce determination that defied the odds stacked against her, yet even the most formidable wall crumbled under relentless siege. The relentless ache of her own hunger was a dull background thrum, easily ignored when faced with the wide, expectant eyes of her youngest, little Finn, who simply asked for a warm story, not a warm meal. Such was the daily crucible of her existence, a perpetual test of faith and fortitude, where every sunset was a small victory and every sunrise a fresh, daunting challenge. What hope could truly bloom in such barren soil, where survival itself was an arduous, unending battle, and the very air seemed to carry the scent of encroaching despair? This was the bleak canvas upon which an improbable twist of fate was about to paint its first indelible stroke, shattering the predictable rhythm of their suffering. The biting wind had carved intricate patterns of frost on the window panes, when Ilara, driven by the gnawing emptiness in her children's eyes, ventured out. Her tattered cloak offered meager protection against the unforgiving cold, each gust a fresh assault on her weary frame. The forest, a silent sentinel on the edge of their impoverished village, was her last resort, its stark branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards a gray, indifferent sky. She sought roots, discarded branches, anything that could be transformed into a semblance of a meal, a spark of warmth. The crunch of dry leaves beneath her worn boots was the only sound for a long time, until a faint, almost imperceptible groan pierced the stillness. It was a sound that resonated with the profound vulnerability of something utterly broken, a sound that stirred a deep, unsettling empathy within her, despite her own desperate circumstances. There, amidst a tangle of thorny bushes, lay a man half buried by fallen snow, his once fine garments now mud-stained and ripped, his face a mask of gaunt suffering. He was barely clinging to life, his breath shallow, his body shivering uncontrollably. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Ilara, fear, caution, and a deep-seated human impulse to help, an impulse she could barely afford to heed. What kind of person, she wondered, would leave a man to perish in such a desolate place, stripped of his dignity, and left to the mercy of the elements? Was he a brigand, a vagrant, or merely another victim of this harsh, unforgiving world? The pragmatic voice in her mind, honed by years of hardship, screamed for her to turn away, to conserve her meager energy, to remember her own hungry children. Yet another voice, softer but more insistent, echoed the simple plea of shared humanity. Her gaze lingered on his pale, drawn face, and she saw not a threat, but a reflection of a suffering she understood intimately. The very air around him seemed to hum with a silent story of ruin, a collapse from some lofty height. He was a stark, living metaphor for the brutal caprice of fortune, and in that moment Ilara knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that she could not abandon him to the cold embrace of death, not if a shred of life still flickered within him. Compassion, a dangerous luxury in their world, compelled Ilara to act. Within strength she didn't know she possessed, she dragged the man, heavier than he appeared, towards her humble cottage, each agonizing step a testament to her unwavering spirit. The children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and childlike curiosity, watched as their mother laid the unconscious stranger by the dying embers of their hearth. He was a stark contrast to their own emaciated frames, a man whose features, though hollowed by starvation, hinted at a past life of privilege. His hands, though cold and still, were smooth, unblemished by toil, a silent testament to a world far removed from their own gritty existence. Ilara, with deft, practiced movements, removed his tattered outer layers, revealing a fine linen shirt, soiled but clearly of superior quality. She mixed the last handful of their precious oats with water, heating it over the scant fire, creating a thin gruel, a sacrifice of their own dwindling resources. Each spoonful she offered him, carefully coaxing it past his lips, was an act of profound selflessness. Her eldest daughter, Lena, wise beyond her years, watched her mother's painstaking efforts, a silent question in her eyes. "Will there be enough for us, Mama?" Ilara merely offered a tired smile, a silent promise she prayed she could keep. Days blurred into a tense, fragile dance of recovery. The man, whose name they did not yet know, drifted in and out of consciousness, his fevered breaths filling the small space. Ilara nursed him with an almost ritualistic dedication, her touch gentle, her gaze unwavering. She cleaned his wounds, offered him sips of precious water, and whispered words of encouragement, as if her very voice could coax life back into his fading form. The children, initially apprehensive, slowly grew accustomed to his silent presence, their innocent curiosity beginning to chip away at the initial fear. Little Finn even drew pictures of him, depicting him as a sleeping giant, unaware of the profound irony of their rescuer's true identity. This act of profound kindness, a defiant gesture against the harsh realities of their own deprivation, was a precarious gamble. Every shared crumb, every drop of water diminished their own chances of survival, yet Ilara felt an inexplicable pull, a deep, resonant belief that some fates were intertwined, that this silent, suffering man was meant to cross their path, for reasons yet unrevealed. The air in the cottage thrummed with a quiet tension, a fragile hope that this fragile life would hold, and with it, perhaps, some unforeseen turning point for them all. As the days stretched into a week, the stranger's eyes finally opened, clear and alert, though still haunted by a distant pain. He sat up slowly, his gaze sweeping over the small, impoverished room, taking in the worn furniture, the patched walls, and finally resting on Ilara, who stood by the hearth, a silent sentinel of his recovery. His voice, when it came, was a raspy whisper, but it carried an unexpected authority, a timbre that spoke of command and education, utterly out of place in their humble dwelling. "You saved my life," he stated, not as a question, but as a profound acknowledgement. He introduced himself as Theron, his full name and title, Judge Theron, withheld, a piece of his identity still shrouded in mystery. He spoke of being set upon, robbed, left for dead, a plausible enough tale in those lawless times. Yet Ilara sensed an incompleteness in his narrative, a carefully constructed facade over a deeper truth. He reached into his coat, producing a small, intricately carved wooden box, surprisingly intact. From it he extracted a handful of gold coins, polished and gleaming, a small fortune in their world. He offered them to her, a gesture of repayment, his expression earnest. "This is but a fraction of what I owe you," he murmured, his eyes fixed on her face, searching for a reaction. Ilara, however, did not reach for the glittering coins. She looked at the gold, then back at his still pale face, and a quiet dignity settled over her. "We did what was right," she replied, her voice soft but firm, devoid of avarice or expectation. "You were a life in need. We did not do it for coin." A flicker of surprise, perhaps even awe, crossed Theron's features. Such pure, unadulterated altruism was a rare commodity in his world, a world where every transaction had a price, every kindness a hidden agenda. He persisted, gently pressing the coins towards her, reminding her of her children's obvious deprivation. But Ilara remained resolute. The unspoken question hung in the air. What kind of woman, in her desperate state, would refuse such a bounty? Her refusal was not a defiant act, but a simple, almost instinctive affirmation of her values, a quiet testament to a moral compass that pointed true north, unswayed by the allure of material wealth. This unexpected rejection, far from diminishing her in his eyes, served only to deepen the enigma that was Ilara, and perhaps to ignite a nascent spark of something entirely unforeseen within the heart of the recovering judge. The moment of Ilara's refusal lingered in the air, a silent testament to a world where values often clashed with the harsh realities of survival. Theron, still weak but regaining his strength with surprising speed, found himself captivated by her unwavering resolve, her quiet grace amidst the chaos of her poverty. He had seen women of beauty, of intellect, of immense wealth, but never one so utterly devoid of pretense, so fiercely protective of her integrity. Each day, as he observed her tireless devotion to her children, her gentle patience with their endless questions, her quiet struggles, a profound realization began to take root within him. His life, before this desolate encounter, had been a gilded cage of power and influence, yet it had been devoid of genuine connection, of the kind of warmth that emanated from Ilara's simple cottage. He had known ambition, betrayal, the cold calculations of justice, but never the raw, tender beauty of unconditional care. One crisp morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the small window, painting faint stripes across the wooden floor, Theron, still seated by the hearth, spoke. His voice was no longer raspy but clear, resonant, carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Ilara," he began, his gaze steady, unwavering, "I have no family left. My past, in many ways, has left me as desolate as I was when you found me. I offer you more than coin, more than gratitude." Ilara paused, her hands stilling over the mending basket, a sense of foreboding rippling through her. What could such a man offer her, a simple widow, that could possibly equal the gold she had refused? The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant chirping of sparrows, as if the very world held its breath. Then he uttered the words that would shatter the fragile peace of their existence, sending tremors through the very fabric of their future. "Ilara, will you marry me? Will you allow me to provide for you and your children, to share my life, to make amends for the emptiness that has defined it?" The proposal hung in the air, audacious, preposterous, yet delivered with a raw sincerity that both stunned and unsettled her. Her mind reeled, a whirlwind of disbelief, fear, and a terrifying, unfamiliar flicker of hope. Marry a rich judge, a man whose world was light years away from her own? The thought was absurd, dangerous, yet his eyes, dark and intense, held a plea she could not entirely dismiss. Was this an act of desperate gratitude, a momentary madness, or something deeper, something profoundly transformative? The question hung heavy, a precipice upon which her entire future, and that of her children, now teetered. The audacious proposal ricocheted through Ilara's mind, a chaotic symphony of hope and dread. Her initial shock quickly gave way to a maelstrom of questions, each one sharper than the last. Marriage? To a man she barely knew, a man whose life, even in its current state of disarray, bore the unmistakable hallmarks of privilege and power? The absurdity of it was almost comical, yet the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet desperation in his voice, suggested a truth more complex than simple charity. She looked at her children, their small faces still marked by the gauntness of hunger, their futures uncertain, and a cold wave of pragmatism washed over her. Could this be their salvation, a lifeline thrown from a world she could only dream of? Or was it a gilded cage, a trap laid by a man she did not truly understand? The village, when the whispers inevitably began, erupted in a cacophony of judgment. The women, their faces pinched with envy and suspicion, gathered in hushed, venomous circles, dissecting Ilara's character, her past, her sudden, inexplicable fortune. A common widow with 7 mouths to feed? What trickery has she wrought? They hissed, their words like stones thrown at her fragile peace. The men, equally bewildered, spoke of sorcery, of a judge gone mad, of a scandal that would surely stain his esteemed name. Ilara felt the weight of their scrutiny, the icy stares that followed her every move. She had always been an outsider, living on the fringes of their society, but now she was a spectacle, an object of intense, often cruel fascination. Flashbacks, stark and unbidden, flooded her mind, the vacant stares of her neighbors when her husband died, leaving her with nothing but debts and hungry children. The relentless doors slammed in her face when she begged for work, the bitter cold nights she had spent clutching her infants, praying for dawn. Each memory was a stark reminder of the abyss from which she had clawed her way back, time and again. She had survived through sheer grit, through the silent, unwavering love for her children, not through the capricious whims of fate or the generosity of strangers. How could she reconcile the fierce independence forged in the fires of adversity with the sudden offer of a life she had never dared to imagine? The judge, for his part, also faced his own internal torment. His reputation, carefully built over decades, was now on the line, threatened by this unconventional decision. He was a man of logic, of law, yet his heart had made a most illogical choice. The society that had once lauded him now whispered behind gloved hands, their scorn palpable even from a distance. The tension between their two worlds, so disparate, so fundamentally different, hummed in the air, a silent, powerful force that threatened to pull them apart even before they had truly begun. The weight of society's scorn was a tangible shroud, clinging to Alara and Theron as they navigated the treacherous waters of their unexpected engagement. The judge, a man accustomed to unwavering respect, found himself in the unusual position of being the subject of gossip and derision. This vulnerability, however, seemed to strip away layers of his carefully constructed facade, revealing something raw and deeply human beneath. One evening, as the shadows lengthened and the fire cast dancing shapes on the walls, Theron finally began to unravel the true narrative of his precipitous fall. His voice, once resonant with the authority of the courtroom, now held a tremor of vulnerability, a profound weariness. "My past, Ilara, is not as clean as the robes I once wore," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames, avoiding her eyes. "I was a judge, yes, but also a man blinded by ambition, by a hunger for power that consumed all else. I pursued justice, but often I pursued it with a cold, unyielding hand, forgetting the human cost." He recounted a specific case, a powerful family accused of corruption, a web of deceit that he had painstakingly untangled. But in his relentless pursuit of justice, he had made a formidable enemy, one who operated in the shadows, whose reach extended far beyond the courtroom. "I uncovered a truth that threatened to bring down more than just a family. It threatened the very pillars of this city's elite," he revealed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They did not want me dead, Alara. Not outright. That would have created a martyr. They wanted me broken, stripped of everything, left to rot in obscurity, a warning to others who might dare to challenge their dominion." This was the true reason for his near-death state, a carefully orchestrated ruin rather than a simple robbery. He spoke of betrayal by trusted colleagues, of assets seized, of his reputation meticulously tarnished, leaving him utterly destitute and vulnerable, a broken man left for dead on the road. The humiliation had been more profound than the physical pain, a wound that festered deep within his soul. He had been a man who prided himself on control, on logic, and suddenly he was adrift, utterly powerless. "When you found me, I was not merely starving. I was spiritually bankrupt," he admitted, finally meeting her gaze, his eyes mirroring a profound shame. "Your kindness, Ilara, your unwavering compassion was the first genuine warmth I had felt in months. It was a lifeline in an abyss of my own making. I don't offer you marriage merely out of gratitude, but out of a desperate need for a connection that is real, unblemished by the artifice of my former life. I am a flawed man, Ilara, broken and burdened by past mistakes, but I yearn for something true, something that your family, your very being, represents." His confession, raw and painful, explained the missing pieces, the lingering mystery surrounding his ordeal. It painted a picture of a man, once powerful, now humbled, stripped bare by the very system he had once upheld. It was a truth that made him morally ambiguous, yes, but also intensely vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, Ilara saw not a monster, but another soul scarred by life's harsh, unforgiving blows. The revelation of Theron's shadowed past settled over Ilara like a heavy cloak, adding another layer of complexity to the already bewildering tapestry of their intertwined fates. He was not merely a wealthy man offering a convenient escape. He was a broken man seeking redemption, a hand reaching out from his own personal abyss. His story, though steeped in the corruption of the elite, resonated with her own experiences of powerlessness and vulnerability in the face of an uncaring world. She saw in him not just a judge, but a man stripped bare, much like she had been stripped of her husband and livelihood. The stark honesty of his confession, the raw shame in his eyes, had a profound effect. It was not a tale of heroic survival, but of cunning defeat, of a calculated ruin orchestrated by forces far beyond his control. This shared understanding of having faced the abyss, albeit from vastly different vantage points, created an unexpected bridge between them. Ilara spent days in quiet contemplation, observing Theron, listening to his humble apologies, watching how he interacted with her children, who, with their innate innocence, had already begun to embrace him, their fear replaced by a burgeoning affection. He was surprisingly gentle, patient, his deep voice softening as he read them stories by the fire. He was not the cold, unyielding judge he had described, but a man yearning for a different path. The pragmatic voice still whispered doubts. Could this union truly last? Could such disparate lives truly merge? Would his enemies resurface? But then she looked at Lena, whose cough had worsened with the cold, at Finn, whose small belly still sometimes ached, and the sheer desperation for their survival outweighed all else. This was not a romance born of grand gestures or passionate declarations, but a sober, calculated decision, forged in the crucible of necessity and a nascent, fragile respect. One evening, under the watchful gaze of the flickering lamplight, Ilara approached him. Her voice, usually soft, carried an unusual firmness. "Judge Theron," she began, using his title deliberately, "I do not pretend to understand all of your world, nor do I fully comprehend the dangers that may still follow you. But I understand desperation, and I understand what it means to build a life from ashes. My children need a future, and perhaps you need a different kind of life." Her words were not an affirmation of love, but a profound acceptance, a pragmatic commitment born of shared vulnerability and a mutual need for something better. The wedding was a stark affair, devoid of pomp and circumstance. It took place in the small, unassuming village church, presided over by a bewildered priest. The few villagers who dared to attend watched with a mixture of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled scorn. Ilara wore her best, albeit patched dress, her children at her side, their faces scrubbed clean, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. Theron, dressed in simple but well-made clothes procured from a nearby town, looked less like a powerful judge and more like a man stripped of his former glory, a paradox of strength and humility. As he looked at Ilara, a flicker of something akin to genuine peace settled in his eyes, a profound understanding that this was not a triumphant return, but a quiet, hopeful beginning, forged not in the grand halls of power, but in the humble confines of a poor widow's love and compassion. The transition from the dilapidated cottage to the judge's newly reacquired, albeit modest estate, was not the fairy tale it might have appeared from the outside. The house, once grand, bore the scars of neglect, a silent testament to Theron's fall. Dust motes danced in the sparse sunlight filtering through grimy windows, and the air still carried the faint scent of disuse. For Ilara and her children, it was a world of dizzying contrasts. Warm beds, enough food, clean clothes. These were luxuries they had only ever dreamed of, and their initial joy was palpable. Yet the vastness of the rooms, the silence that sometimes descended, felt alien compared to the constant bustle and intimacy of their cramped cottage. The children, initially overwhelmed, soon adapted with the boundless resilience of youth, finding wonder in every corner, every new toy. But Ilara found herself grappling with a new set of challenges, invisible to the casual observer. The village whispers had not ceased, they had merely intensified, morphing into a constant, insidious hum of derision and suspicion. The peasant queen, they called her, their voices dripping with contempt. Ladies of society, those who had once fawned over Judge Theron, now gave her the cold shoulder, their painted smiles never quite reaching their eyes. She was a constant reminder of his fall, an unwelcome stain on their carefully constructed social fabric. She was neither fully accepted into his world, nor truly welcomed in her old one. Her own children, while thriving, sometimes struggled with their new status, feeling the subtle sting of being different. Theron, for his part, was a man rebuilding from the ground up, not just his wealth, but his very identity. He worked tirelessly, revisiting old cases, meticulously rebuilding his network, attempting to salvage his reputation. But the shadows of his past still loomed. Letters arrived, sometimes veiled threats, sometimes legal challenges from those he had once prosecuted, or those who had engineered his downfall. The peace they had found was a fragile thing, constantly threatened by the lingering echoes of his former life. He was a good husband, a patient father, but the weariness in his eyes spoke volumes of the battles he still fought, battles Elara could only witness from the periphery. The initial hope that had blossomed in the aftermath of his proposal was now tempered by the harsh reality that a marriage of convenience, even one born of genuine affection and need, was not a shield against the world's enduring biases. They were a family forged in an unlikely crucible, and their journey was far from over. The real test, the true measure of their bond, lay not in the promise of a saved life, but in the daily unyielding struggle to define what that salvation truly meant. The whispers intensified, sharp as shards of glass, threatening to shatter the fragile peace Elara and Theron had painstakingly built. Their new life, though physically comfortable, was a constant battleground of unspoken judgments and simmering resentment. The climax, when it finally arrived, came not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow, tightening noose, a culmination of the lingering threats from Theron's past. A powerful, vindictive merchant, whose illicit enterprises Theron had dismantled years prior, re-emerged from the shadows, intent on not just destroying Theron's fragile reputation, but dismantling his very existence, stripping him of his re-earned wealth and, most painfully, the newfound family he cherished. This adversary, a man named Silas, wielded influence and wealth, twisting legal processes, bribing officials, and planting malicious rumors that painted Theron as a madman, Elara as a conniving opportunist, and their marriage as an unholy union. The accusations were insidious, designed to isolate them, to turn public opinion irrevocably against them. Elara watched, helpless yet resolute, as Theron became increasingly withdrawn, his face etched with strain. He was fighting a legal battle, yes, but also a social one, a relentless assault on the very foundation of their new life. One evening, Silas's machinations reached their peak. A warrant for Theron's arrest, based on fabricated charges of embezzlement, and a petition to declare him mentally unfit, aimed at seizing his assets and chillingly separating the children from Elara, deeming her an unfit mother due to her questionable past and illicit influence over the judge. The threat was real, immediate, and utterly devastating. Elara, normally quiet and reserved, felt a primal fury ignite within her. She was not a lady of society, but she was a mother, a survivor, and she would not stand by as her family was ripped apart by the very forces that had once left her starving. She confronted Theron, not with despair, but with fierce determination. "We will not surrender to these shadows," she declared, her voice low but firm, echoing the resilience that had defined her entire life. "You taught me that justice is not just in books, but in fighting for what is right. We will fight them, together." It was in that moment, seeing the unwavering fire in her eyes, that Theron truly understood the depth of the woman he had married. She was his rock, his compass, the quiet strength he had unknowingly yearned for. The following day, amidst a crowded courtroom filled with sneering elites and the watchful eyes of the few common folk who dared to attend, Theron, with Elara by his side, stood tall. He did not merely defend himself. He exposed Silas's web of deceit, presenting evidence Elara had helped him unearth from obscure ledgers and forgotten correspondences. It was a harrowing, emotionally charged confrontation, a battle not just for his freedom, but for their family's very right to exist. The meticulously laid bare, was stark and undeniable. Silas was exposed, his reputation shattered, his schemes unraveled. Theron was vindicated, his name cleared, but more importantly, their bond was irrevocably forged in the crucible of that public battle. The resolution was not a fairy tale ending where all societal prejudices vanished. The whispers continued, though muted, less venomous. Their acceptance into the highest echelons of society remained tenuous, scarred by the scandalous origins of their union, but their family, however unconventional, was whole. Theron, no longer driven by cold ambition, pursued justice with a renewed sense of purpose, his judgments now tempered by the empathy Ilara had reawakened within him. Ilara, the poor widow, found her voice not in grand pronouncements, but in quiet acts of defiance, in the fierce protection of her children, and in her unwavering support for her flawed, yet deeply changed husband. They were survivors, yes, but more than that, they were a testament to the transformative power of unexpected kindness, a hopeful resolution demonstrating that love, even born from desperation, could forge a bond resilient enough to weather the cruelest storms. Their salvation found not in wealth or status, but in each other.